this activity, I challenged myself to go to ceramics classes to learn how to make a clay pot on a wheel and then glaze it. From the range of providers offering classes in my region, I chose Clay Studio Canberra, partly because it was located on my side of town and partly because of the content and times of the classes offered. The series of 5 two-hour morning classes that I attended were taught by a very personable, knowledgeable and experienced ceramicist in premises located in a repurposed high school horticulture facility. The class included 5 to 6 other people, all of whom had had at least some pot throwing experience, and so I was the only complete beginner. Good morning, everybody. Here I am. It's Tuesday morning. I think it's the 4th of February. I'm just about to go to my first pottery class. I did pottery in high school in the late 1960s, and I haven't done any since. Really keen to try some ceramics. It's been a busy few days, though. I think on Saturday I had a glass mosaic workshop. On Sunday I did rock and roll dancing for the first time. Last night I did acting lesson, my first acting lesson ever. Love that. So now I'm going to do ceramics. Looking forward to showing you more about that. Bye. The first skill to learn when attempting to make a clay vessel on a pottery wheel is the art of throwing the lump of clay onto the wheel so it sticks in place on the surface as close to the centre as possible. If the lump doesn't stick, it will quickly slide off. Alternatively, if it sticks but is badly centred, the top of the clay can break off if it is forced back into the centre. While most professional potters throw their clay directly onto the metal plate, we used a method where a thin wet chamois leather was spread over the surface first and scraped free of excess water. A wooden bat was then placed on top of the chamois and we threw the clay onto the bat. While I understood that this system made it much easier for us to later remove and store the pots for drying, I struggled endlessly with both ensuring that the bat was centred sufficiently well so it stayed on the chamois without it buckling up underneath, and with throwing down the lump of clay so it was centred on the bat sufficiently well to be able to work properly. Despite being personally shown exactly what to do by our teacher, achieving the right result was clearly a matter of practice until I got the hang of it. Then, once the mass of clay is sufficiently centred, the second necessary skill is to be able to work it up and down in rhythmic movements to ensure that the clay is mixed well and its consistency is smooth. I struggled with this as well. Again, while I was shown exactly how to hold my hands around the clay and use my fingers to work the shape up and down, and I had an instruction chart in front of me, I still found the process difficult to master. I needed both stronger hands and time to work on maintaining a consistent technique. The third technique is actually forming the pot, firstly by opening out the centre while leaving the base sufficiently thick to enable its later removal from the bat, and then by raising the sides carefully with well-placed fingers. Of course, this skill needed endless practice also, but I did manage to master enough of the techniques to make a finished product. The session ended with everyone cleaning up their tools, wheels and workspaces. As my pottery wheel could be dismantled, I took it outside to hose down. I left the studio feeling very downhearted. Being a beginner at age 70 isn't easy. The second class started with me learning how to cut a large piece of clay into smaller pieces and then shape them into round balls. Joanne then provided a lengthy revision session on centering, coning and shaping for the newbies in the group. At my wheel, I struggled again with centering the wooden bat onto the wet chamois and then centering the ball of clay, although my coning technique seemed to be improving and my first 2 pots came out okay. But then I lost it completely. I couldn't do anything right, but with lots more personal tuition, I managed a 3rd pot that I was happy with. By the end of the class, I managed my quota of 6 pots. Finally, I was getting somewhere. At the beginning of the 3rd class, I was told that I could make whatever I liked. Having seen some of the wonderful pots that other people in the class had made, I was at first excited by this thought. But being basically a realist, I decided that I should probably work on mastering the fundamental techniques that I'd been taught so far to build my confidence before I embarked on anything too fancy, such as a bowl with a lid or a mug with a handle. This turned out to be a good decision, as it seemed that over the intervening week I had regressed to being clumsy again. Eventually, however, my persistence paid off and my confidence grew with each finished pot. In the 4th ceramics class, we were taught about trimming techniques, with Joanne first giving a comprehensive demonstration of the different ways in which a clay pot could be trimmed. Our pots had been stored over the last few weeks in large polystyrene boxes for safekeeping, so I pulled my 12 pots out and lined them up ready for trimming. But when I set about trimming my own pots, I found that, yet again, there were special techniques to learn, especially in terms of exactly how tools were held and where to place my fingers on the pot. I really enjoyed this activity because it meant that I could improve some of my pots that I'd thought were a bit clumsy, especially by reshaping the bottom. Over the week prior to our 5th class, our trim pots had all been fired. They now needed to be sorted by name so that we could wipe them down and start the glazing process. Ceramic pots are fired in 2 stages. The first, called bisque, is usually carried out at temperatures ranging from 960 to 1000 degrees to burn out any organic materials, to harden the clay, and to make it porous for glaze absorption, although it is not so hard that the pot cannot be reshaped. The pots are then glazed and fired a 2nd time at a higher temperature, which melts the glaze and fuses it to the clay. Different types of clay and different glazes need different firing temperatures, ranging upwards from 1220 degrees centigrade. Joanne had set out more than 10 buckets of glazes in the studio, all of which needed to be stirred to blend in the contents that had settled at the bottom since their last use. And so we did this while she explained the different glazing techniques and described the difference between oxidation glazes and reduction glazes, which had to be fired separately. The catch with glazes is that the colour of the liquid does not necessarily bear any resemblance to the colour of the finished glaze. Plus, sometimes it can be difficult to know exactly how a glaze is going to turn out. However, a set of sample glazes was set out along the shelf in the studio and hung in charts on the wall so that we could check how each glaze might look. I also enjoyed the glazing process, although my early determination to take notes of exactly what glaze I put on which pot disappeared after the first few, as I focused on getting the pots in and out of the glazes without incident, plus it all took much longer than I thought, partly because of the need to dance around other class members who were trying to dip their pots into the buckets of glaze. And by the end, I was close to just playing around. A month later, the pots were ready to collect. Mine had been wrapped in newspaper and placed in a paper bag, so it wasn't until I got home and unwrapped them that I was able to appreciate the glazes on each one. Wow, look at that. That is so gorgeous. Wow, look at this one. This is so cool. Wow. That's the one I carved a bit. Look at the texture on the front there. Beautiful blue on the inside. I don't know if you can see that. The most beautiful blue on the inside. It's like a lucky dip. Oh, look at that. Isn't that gorgeous? Wow, so pleased with that. Sing that one off well enough. Only I've got two more. Oh, look at that. That one is gorgeous. I love that. Wow, look at that one. The set of 5 ceramics classes cost $600.06, plus I purchased an apron from Bunnings at a cost of $17.18, which was clearly made for a large man to wear while working at a barbecue. In my next episode, I take on my 13th challenge in this series, going to the Treetops Adventure Facility at Majura Park, where I learn as much about preparedness as I do about walking on swing ropes and pieces of timber 3 metres off the ground. For more information about living your own unlived life, if you go to my website, you can download a copy of my free book, Living Your Unlived Life, Finding Contentment by Honouring Your Dreams. And if it's your thing, you could like this video and subscribe to my channel.